I'm excited to announce our upcoming 2023 Banking with Life client-only event. It's going to happen in mid-October of 2023. It's going to happen downtown Fort Worth, Texas. Our whole team will be there. The team has been working very hard to make this an event that's not to be missed. I'll be there, have an opportunity to meet me, have an opportunity to meet the team. I'm going to be speaking. We'll have other guest speakers, and you'll have the opportunity to meet a room full of like-minded people. Think about that. A room full of people that are practicing becoming their own banker. They are practicing the infinite banking concept. You'll have the opportunity to meet with them and share with them. You got to be somewhere. You might as well be there. In this episode, my friend Michael returns as he was a previous guest about a year ago. We had a great conversation, all things infinite banking concept, from cash flows, discipline, real estate, and controlling the banking function in your life. We had a great time and hope you enjoy listening. Thank you. Welcome to the Banking with Life podcast. I'm your host, James Neathery. And I always get excited when friends and people come into the studio, and I'm really excited today because I have my friend Michael back for a second time. And, he's from California and he's in Texas, getting his stuff done. And he squeezed in a little bit of time to come down here and share with us. And I'm very appreciative of that. And it's always good to see you, Michael. How have you been, sir?
I've been well. Well, usually Fort Worth is now kind of like one of my stops, either into town or on the way out. So
perfect.
Got to come by and see the family.
That's right. And we have fun. So now listen, Michael, we've known each other since about Q1 of 2021. He became a client in August 2021. You discovered, though, were exposed to the infinite banking concept, before we ever met.
Yeah, I think it was sometime, I want to say it was sometime in 2019, if my memory is correct.
Okay, yeah. So you've been going a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been 3 years, but I'd say like the evolution of just learning, especially just about just how money works, monetary theory, just the basics of it. I've gotten into the weeds, but just understanding, the flow of money, where it flows from, where it flows to, and how to, how I can have an effect on that.
Yeah, who controls that flow, huh?
Yeah, it's and then, it's on one hand it's frightening, from a couple different perspectives, but then too when you start recapturing some of that flow and you realize how powerful you can be in that equation. There's a lot of energy to that. There's a lot of peace to it, I found. Especially day to day. I think I may have talked. I don't remember who I talked to. It was probably on the first podcast and stuff. But I don't really pay attention to the stock market anymore. Really at all. Well, I'll casually look at it just to see, if there's panic out in the street, if there's blood out in the street. Just because overall, that's kind of where opportunities are. But as far as
panic and blood in the streets,
that's one that. Yeah, I mean, I like to be solutions to people's problems.
Sure.
But that comes with having access to capital and having a place that you've systematically been storing it, which is what the infinite banking concept. Since my learnings began, and then the saw continues to be sharpened with you and people like you. It's really refreshing to knowing that you have this war chest that's continuously being built. So there's a lot of freedom in that. There's a lot of peace in that.
There's so many, I want to say intangible, but they're really not intangible. There are intangible, but there are many tangible benefits to having access to capital that you control without the required approval from anyone. I mean, that's just one benefit, and then the discipline of the systematic accumulation, formation of capital, kind of put a path or direction, a purpose, to your capital, and then what that requires, you're a part of that purpose, right? There's a lot of benefits to that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And speaking of the first podcast, I want to say that you came here and recorded an episode number 96 back in August of 2021, and that was titled "The Surfer, Real Estate Investor, and Peace Officer." So we'll put a link for that one below. So I just
that was fun. Yeah.
There's a lot that's happened since then.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, there has been.
The growth continues. You know.
I think. Yeah, going back to what you just said about discipline, I think for me personally, and I think if we really spent some time and turned off TVs and things and really listened to ourselves, I think there's a lot of discipline that's just needed in general.
Yeah,
and I know Ryan's talked about it, and you guys have discussed it on the podcast before. But I know that's important to me. But just controlling some of, just creating some discipline. There's such an amount of freedom in that, because that's it's all I have to do is, well, I didn't do it really anyway. Is spend more than I make, but you can always fine tune that process and find, leaks in the dam that you didn't know that you had. But unless you're in a position to where you can listen, you're never going to, isolate and identify those things. Yeah. So that's something that I just continue to do. Cause it's, I'm the variable that has the biggest impact on the performance of my banking system. So I owe that to myself, and I owe that to my nieces, who are the beneficiaries of all this. So I think they would want their uncle to pay a little bit more attention and continue to keep their pulse on what's going on.
Yeah, well, the uncle needs to lead the way and be the example, right? No question about that. And discipline. It's a learned, it's a learned habit. It's a learned thinking through that. And I love what you said, if people just like slow down and listen to themselves, that's a scary, if you don't do that, if you haven't done that, it may seem scary, but that's probably, it's extremely important. My point being is you're a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for.
You
set aside time to listen to yourself, like he suggested, you'll be thankful that you did.
Yeah, and this is stuff that isn't taught in schools too. So I went to Texas A&M and have a finance degree.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the only school that I applied to. Yeah. Oh. So, and I did that.
And a finance degree. Maybe I did know that and forgot it.
Well, I went to A&M. I chose finance because one of the guys that finished, because not that it means anything, but I was, like in the top 10 of my class, but it was like because of a lot of work. It wasn't, I was not naturally gifted or anything like that. And it came with a lot of work, because mom and dad said that, you bring home anything less than an A and we're going to have some meetings with teachers and things. And
that's the kind of guy he is. I'm proud of you.
Yeah. And the kid of a police chief is like, okay, you don't want to upset the boss, but more so I'm afraid of my mom, who's 4'11". So,
some authoritarian figures.
I'm still terrified. I will never cuss around here. I did once and tangent. But none of the, I chose finance because, the guy that I grew up with and graduated with, who was also going to A&M, just told me that I wasn't smart enough. So I was like, well, all right, well, I'm doing that after I finished playing baseball. So, yeah, so I played junior college baseball and then transferred directly into
Are you still friends with him? He told you weren't smart enough?
No, I mean, I didn't take it personal, but I'm kind of the guy that always likes a little motivation. And I was like, oh, please tell me that I can't do something, because I'll probably end up doing that.
Right.
So that was, I think, all the thought that went into it. But no, the answer to your question is I don't think I've spoken to him, not because of that incident, right. Since really high school.
So finance degree, and then you wind up in.
Yeah, well, I was originally going to work for an asset-based lender in Dallas, because I was one of their first interns in their asset-based lending group in college, and I was trying to figure out, why do you want me? I haven't finished my first upper level finance class and you're already asking me to intern. Like, what do you see? Because I don't see it. But yeah, it was a good experience. And that was probably the most I've attempted to use, my degree directly. But again, it was more so, showing a little discipline and finishing something that you started. That's probably most impactful, because I think, looking at the product that's that's pushed out from most universities today is lackluster at best.
Yeah, we're in trouble.
That, coming back to, issues of discipline and, and really putting your brain in a position, because it's a huge muscle that wants to learn and wants to be exercised. If you put it in a position to do so, it'll achieve some pretty great things. And I think going through, and I don't know if we talked about it on the first episode, but having a lot of time, especially in the industry that I work in, where I work a lot, and I'm thankful to have the ability to do so. But during, that thing that happened, that Voldemort situation in 2020 that we can't talk about, I had a lot of free time to learn. Yeah. And that's why I try to use that time to do, with monetary theory and understanding how the Fed operates and how, how the government gets money, how it sources projects and things like that. And that's when I probably knew, but I didn't know, of just like, I don't give my own brain enough credit sometimes of what it will learn if you just surround it by, knowledge. So,
my mind as you're sharing that, which I did not, and maybe, when we first met and had conversations, I like to think I take pretty good notes. And so I'm sure that came up, Texas A&M and finance degree. And then the asset-based lending, I'm like, I didn't recall that either. And now you go and peace officer, and in my mind, while you're talking, I'm thinking, man, this guy's fighting crime his whole life.
Yeah. When you look at it from that perspective, when you're like, I've been on both sides of that coin. Companies that couldn't go get traditional lending would lend on their inventory.
Yeah,
because they didn't
asset-based lending is like, listen, your assets got to at least 25-50% over the loan amount. So we want to over-collateralize.
Yep. And then, for those of you that don't, kind of know what that is, that is the very basis of that. We would look from a lending standpoint, we would go and look at a company's inventory, not their, what they call slow moving inventory, which would, we would look at, between 0 and maybe 60 days. If they can turn over that portion of inventory, we would lend on a percentage of what they could turn over and create an accounts receivable or money coming in from their end consumer. So we would lend on.
What was that ratio back then? Do you remember?
I think it was between 50 and 60%.
The immediate thought to my mind was 50%.
Yeah. I want to say at max it was 60. But I remember in the middle of the summer just sweating like crazy in warehouses because I'm counting stuffed animals because I don't know if,
the proper accounting.
Proper accounting off of Dolphin Road in Dallas. And I'm going like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that area, but you don't want to be there when the sun goes down or while it's up and I'm in their warehouse. So just to give you an idea.
That's funny. So it's like it's over collateralized on the loan, and then when they sign their John Henry, everything that they own or thought they owned is
now the banks.
Yeah, collateralizing.
Yep.
Beyond that little bit.
The lender always gets paid first.
Always. Mm-hmm. And I if I can recall, there were 3 or 4 C's into banking, and I'm sure a listener will help me out. Is character, capital. Character, collateral, and I don't remember what the 3rd and 4th C's were in banking, right? So you got to have the character, and you got to have the collateral, and I don't know what the other 2 are. But if those don't exist, you're not getting a loan.
No.
And the collateral is always far more valuable than the loan. So. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's an asset to them. We talk about tiers of assets and where banks and where companies hold life insurance, and knowing that that's like the top tier of an asset. Well, we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with things that a good or service, what little we still produce, and then lending against that. So,
well, those were they teddy bears? What were you counting?
No, it was a company that made that at the time had the NFL license. So they would everything from blankets to to stuffed animals to pillowcases, anything that you could stuff an NFL logo on or a team logo on. It was in this warehouse, and it felt like the warehouse didn't have a roof. It was like you kept climbing and it just kept getting taller and taller, you know.
I'm just thinking it's 108 degrees outside today.
Yeah, that's when the internship was, in the middle of the Texas heat in the summertime. Yeah.
But then, you know, some of that product was surely made in China, right? I don't know I don't know. Okay, I don't.
Yeah, there was probably a lot of stamps on the boxes.
Went through a lot of customs. Okay, so what'd you do? You know, what'd you do after that? Did you just go right into law enforcement, or?
No. I ended up working for Anheuser-Busch for about 11 years. I started in Georgia with them, and I was there for about 3 to 4 months, and then they asked me to take a full-time position in St. Louis. So then I ended up moving to the corporate office. I was there for about 2 years, and I worked in like corporate quality assurance. My first job was an engineer. I'm like, I have a finance degree. And that's when I, now looking back, is like, degrees are useless. What's on them as far as, finance, you're kind of stuck in this little silo over here. I was like, no, I was dealing with engineers all day and consumer complaints, and I was working with, the parent company downtown, and working through consumer related issues as to why beer tasted or arrived at a consumer a certain way, or tasted a certain way, or what was in the package along with the beer, things like that. And then working to improve those processes to eliminate those defects, or that type of defects. Okay. And then moved from there to California in 2005, because again, I didn't have a wife or kids, so they relocated me quite often to get me exposure to different areas of the business. So then I spent some time in operations management, accounting, quality assurance, back to operations management, and then sales and marketing before I left. And was that 2013? So, yeah,
that's pretty well-rounded experience there.
Yeah, I mean, it taught me, a lot of things that weren't taught in school, is like how to think critically, how what process improvement is, how to break down a complex problem or something that we perceive to be a problem, how to think through that. Analytically in a strategic manner to isolate root causes, to eliminate some of the noise from processes that you have to eliminate in order then to actually listen to the process. Mm-hmm. But that's a mentality that that was invaluable to learn, and that I still use. I still use it professionally and personally, because it's a mindset. It's not a you don't have to have a piece of software or anything to accomplish that.
I love that. Yeah. And so, how did you get into law enforcement? Did you stay in California once you were there? And
yeah. No, I had a close friend at the time that was, I was struggling at the time. I'd been with Anheuser-Busch, in 3 states, like 6 different locations, something like that.
That's some loyalty right there.
Yeah, and I just remember, I was in California, there, it's the informal name is called the Valley, which is the San Fernando Valley, which is, just north of LA, from Malibu kind of up to, the northern end of LA. Everyone just calls it the Valley. And I was living near Malibu at the time, and then working in a city called Westlake Village, which is where our office was. And I just remember it was one of the late nights when I'd been, we get yelled at constantly. There was just a lot of pressure as far as market share, because that was a lot of things that we were, that I was working on at the time. Was there were a lot of competing brands that were starting to affect, Bud Light, or I probably shouldn't say the brands, but a lot of the brands that were in our portfolio, there was a lot of competing brands that were kind of hunting and pecking away at market share, and everyone knew what the issues were, but no one really wanted to say it, So it just turned into a bunch of yelling. We're like, how do we make this pile of crap a little bit more palatable? So that's what, most of us like, well, we got to tell a better story. And it was like, either way, we all know what the story is. The story is terrible to read and it's terrible to experience. So it just got to a point, kind of living in that evolution of the last position that I had, that I was like, man, who did I affect today? Or like, what did I accomplish today? Like,
get yelled at for it.
Yeah. And then I was like, then I'm in California. I'm like 1,700 miles away from where, from my nearest relative. Like, what am I doing? So it ended up like a guy, a close friend of mine at the time that I went to church with, we'd had some conversations over the course of a couple of years about, changing professions, and it's like, hey, you need to give. He's now a pretty higher ranking, officer in his department. And he's like, you need to give this a shot. I know about your dad and all this stuff. Don't do it for your dad. Don't do it because of him, but I think you can make a difference. You're smart. You can transition. Yeah, you're going to get yelled at and through the academy and stuff. But that'll be nothing compared to what you've done. And so ended up after about 2 or 3 years of convincing, I did that. And that was kind of the transition.
I got it.
Yeah.
And how long has that been?
That was, I left Anheuser-Busch in February of 13, and then I went to the police academy in May of the same year.
I got it.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good experience. Like I said earlier, well-rounded and broad, but it involves a lot of people. I'm just saying that's a broad experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mostly what I do now is centered around that is you're constantly dealing just with people. Now, most often now, I'm either, because I'm not on the streets anymore, but a lot of it is, I'm following up on initial investigations of chaos is really what it is. And some of it's extremely difficult to read, and difficult to investigate. But there's a lot of, there's a lot of value in that.
I can see with the people skills and then the critical thinking and processes, that I can see how you would need to use that, and it would be very beneficial for you, just that method professionally. And
yeah, well, I think it's something that Anheuser-Busch kind of formalized, but I think a large part of it, was the way I was raised is it's just relationships and having valuable relationships, and not like manufactured value, right. Relationships, because like I need something from you, James, but it's something like mutually, even aside from infinite banking. Like I bet if we sat in a room and just had an elongated conversation, we find out that we have more things in common than we don't have in common.
Sure. And
then that's the foundation of the relationship, mm-hmm. and just value that and care for it, because you do need to care for that. But that's mainly, that's the way I see, what I do now is mainly, because unfortunately I have to deal a lot with experts in, like child related injuries, a lot more than I would like to. And I've had to see some things that I wish that I never had to see, but at the same token, I'm very thankful that the general public has never seen those things, and you don't need to see those things.
I don't want to see those things.
But a lot of what I get done is trying to cut through the red tape of government, mm-hmm. and actually be productive. And that's where I kind of used like the private sector stuff that I've learned to kind of bring in my perspective, and lets me to kind of, do my current job and, kind of massage it the way I want to do it. Mm-hmm. Within the confines of the law, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
But productive, that's the key word, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's good. So how did you get exposed to the infinite bank concept? And I'm sure I asked that.
Yeah. No, mainly it came down to like just looking for how to increase the velocity of the dollar I was spending when I initially started investing in real estate. Because the traditional method of whether you're buying turnkey real estate company or turnkey real estate is, well, I can only work so many hours at work at my current job to save up enough for at the time. I'm not sure what the lending standards are now. Probably at least pretty similar. 25% down payment for a non-owner occupied, single family home or duplex or something. I can only work so many hours of overtime to make that down payment. Well, now, if I'm penciling the deal correctly, I'm going to have, a minimum of $250 a month left over after all the snakes and dragons are paid. Well, now I'm back down to zero. I have to go work more of time where I could be off or I could be doing something else to save up enough money again for another down payment. So that's kind of where it started, is how do I speed up that process? Yeah. So then, it naturally went from that progression to, okay, well, what if I don't buy a retail property like from the MLS? Well, what if I buy a wholesale property that needs some work? I'll create some equity. and see what happens. So I did that with a duplex in St. Louis, and then I had, just lessons learned. Like I had a contractor that was less urgent than I would care for him to be, and took probably 3 times as long to do some small renovations because he was working on other jobs.
Yeah.
But it eventually got done, and then at the same time, I started listening to other guys in the real estate space that were working on some different methods. There's books out from the Bigger Pockets team, a company that I follow and website that I follow, and I've had some success with regarding the velocity of money, called they call it the BRRRR method, which is like buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And so I listened, before that book came out, they were promoting it on their podcast. I'd listened to it. They had some guests on about how you can find off-market deals and contact sellers directly. So when I was still working on the streets in the middle of the night, I would write these 3 sentences that they had a guest on. It was like, hey, this is what I write down, but I developed a company that, a robot that writes in penmanship so that I don't have to write them. And I was like, well, I don't have a robot, but I have a left hand. So I was working graveyard at the time. So for about a couple hours towards the end of the shift, the city would get really, it would finally start going to sleep and quieten down. And so I would, go park in a location that was pretty dark, and I could see, kept all, the potential bad stuff in front of me. And I would just write these 3 sentences, and I would address them to a list of people using the criteria that this guy had on the podcast. So ended up buying a house with that. So it cost me about $1.50 to find this buyer. But yeah, I would literally write out these 3 sentences that are ingrained into my head to this day. And then on the way into the station at the end of the night, I would stop by the post office and I would dump off maybe 40 or 50 letters. And then I probably, out of those 40 or 50, I probably did it for a couple of weeks. So probably a couple hundred letters. And I got like 4 phone calls from it, and then ended up finding a house out of it.
We went a little long in this episode because we were having fun. So we're going to pick it up in the next episode. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us on the Banking with Life podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and click on that little notification bell. Otherwise, join us on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher for weekly content.